Hi everyone, this is Deb Furak. I'm your instructor for the semester in Bio 263, Human Anatomy and Physiology 1. This is Chapter 1 from your textbook, and it's an orientation to the human body. First of all, as an overview of anatomy and physiology, we want to look at the definition of those words. Anatomy means the structure. Subdivisions in the study of anatomy would be gross or macroscopic, and I put a little figure here to illustrate. Gross or macroscopic anatomy is studying structures that you can see with the naked eye. Microscopic is also considered anatomy, but it's looking at structures that are too tiny to be able to look at with the naked eye. We need a microscope in order to study these structures. Another approach to studying anatomy is called developmental anatomy, and it's looking at the development of the human body starting with embryonic and fetal development, and it often will continue throughout the lifespan. The study of anatomy involves mastering anatomical terminology. There are a lot of big words. Most of the time they're compound words that we use to describe anatomical structures, etc. Another way to study anatomy is observation, manipulation, such as manipulating a movable joint, for example, like your knee or the hip joint. Palpation, which means feeling things. So when you're studying or looking at the organs in the abdomen, palpation would be like feeling those structures. Auscultation is using your sense of hearing, and that means listening. For example, listening to heart sounds. Physiology is the study of the functions of the body. This is best approached by studying how each organ system functions. Physiology often focuses on the cellular and molecular level. Therefore, it's often kind of abstract and can present some difficult concepts to students. The study of physiology involves the ability to focus at many levels, the study of basic physical principles such as electrical currents, pressures, and movements, and also the study of basic chemical principles. In your textbook, the first few chapters are going to start out, starting with Chapter 2, on the chemical level. And we're just going to have a review of basic chemistry. Chapter 3 is the study of cells. And then Chapter 4 is the study of tissues. Chapter 5 starts out with the integumentary system, and so that is actually an organ system. But the way we are organized in increasing complexity starts with chemical, then up to cellular organization, tissues, organ system, and organismal. And this will appear on this figure right here. So I'm going to flip through these with the step art. Levels of structural organization. The chemical level is when atoms combine to form molecules. Molecules are arranged into teeny little cellular organelles. The cellular level would include all the little cellular organelles that allow that cell to function properly. And this is showing an example of a smooth muscle cell. So these smooth muscle cells join together to form smooth muscle tissue. The tissue level consists of similar types of cells. The next level would be the organ. And you don't usually think of a blood vessel as an organ, but in fact it is, because organs are made up of different types of tissues. And as you can see, this blood vessel has epithelial tissue lining the inside. Then we have smooth muscle going around, let me get the cursor, going around the epithelial tissue. And then we've got connective tissue around the outer layer. These organs are organized into organ systems. So Organ systems are consisting of different organs that are working closely together. And you can see the blood vessel here is part of the cardiovascular system, which also includes the heart, for example. And there are veins and arteries, etc. Some blood vessels. Finally, your organ systems are going to work together to form the human organism. We call this the organismal level, and there are many organ systems that make up the human body, and they all work together to ensure your survival and health. The principle of complementarity refers to the fact that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. Function always reflects structure, and the function is going to depend on the structure's specific form. Also, depending on what kind of function we're looking for, often a structure will be designed in order to achieve that function. There are quite a number of necessary human life functions. One of them is maintaining boundaries. Another is movement. Another is responsiveness, the ability to respond. Next is digestion and absorption. Both of these, of course, are achieved by our digestive system. Metabolism is another necessary life function. Disposal of wastes, growth and development, and reproduction. Now, reproduction, it includes cell division as well as sexual reproduction to produce offspring, which of course is not necessarily for your own survival. However, it is necessary for survival of the species. Okay, and it goes through here kind of defining each of these. Maintaining boundaries, they give you the example here of a plasma membrane or the cell membrane that surrounds each cell. Your skin is also a boundary between your internal environment and the external environment. There it is over here. Movement is also called contractility, and it has to do with muscles. Movement of your body parts is achieved by skeletal muscle, and the movement of substances within the body is achieved through the movement of cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. Responsiveness, and this little figure is illustrating a deep tendon reflex, actually, the patellar reflex, and this responsiveness includes your ability to sense and respond to stimuli. And digestion and absorption, of course, these are two separate processes, and we'll be talking a lot more about those when we get to the digestive system. Metabolism. Metabolism is a lot more abstract. It includes all the chemical reactions that occur in body cells. It includes catabolic and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions break down large molecules into smaller ones, and anabolic reactions would include building larger molecules from smaller substances, molecules or particles. Then we have excretion and elimination. These two terms are slightly different. Both include or involve the removal of wastes. An example of excretion, actually, and this is achieved by your urinary system, we excrete wastes in our urine, and one of the main waste products is urea. We also will excrete any kind of excesses of water and electrolytes. Elimination is usually reserved for the process in the gastrointestinal tract where you eliminate material in the feces. We also can use elimination for ridding the body of carbon dioxide, and that is achieved through your lungs. Growth and development. This is an increase in the size of a body part or the organism. There are variations in anatomy and physiology throughout the life stages. Reproduction, of course, includes cellular division, and we have both mitosis and meiosis, which you learned about in Fundamentals of Biology. And we'll be talking about these later when we get to the reproductive system. And the other part of reproduction would be how we produce offspring. And we will also get to that with the study of the human reproductive systems. In Biology 264, ANP2. The body cells are interdependent upon one another. We are multicellular. That means we have a lot of cells, in fact, literally trillions. Individual cells must remain and function normally, and the cells themselves depend on our organ systems in order to meet their survival needs, and of course the survival needs of the body as a whole. Body functions are accomplished via the functioning of your organ systems. Organ systems must cooperate to maintain life. Figure 1.2 illustrates some examples of interrelationships among body organ systems. So it's showing the digestive system, the respiratory system, cardiovascular system, urinary system, and the integumentary system, which is your skin with the associated structures. So you can see up here the digestive system takes in nutrients, breaks them down, and eliminates unabsorbed matter in the feces. So it's going right through. Obviously our body doesn't look like this. This is a model to represent these processes. Here's the respiratory system. It takes in oxygen from the air that we breathe, and then it will eliminate carbon dioxide in the air that we exhale. Here, and you can see the cardiovascular system right here in the middle. And this is distributing oxygen and nutrients to all the body cells and delivering waste and carbon dioxide to the disposal organs. And this, of course, is through the bloodstream. The urinary system eliminates nitrogenous waste. This means molecules that have the element nitrogen in them. We have specialized system, particularly the urinary system, that is going to excrete things such as urea and uric acid, which of course we're going to be talking about when we get to the urinary system. The integumentary system protects the body as a whole from the external environment. And these next figure 1.3, and there's quite a few letters to it, it just goes through the various systems that we're going to be studying over the next year for Human Anatomy and Physiology 1 and Human Anatomy and Physiology 2. Here's the integumentary system. Here is the skeletal system. This is protecting and supporting the body organs, providing a framework that the muscles can use to cause movement or mobility. Also, there's a few other functions to bones or the skeletal system, and that is blood cell formation, storing minerals, etc. And we have a whole unit on the skeletal system, as well as the integumentary system, which I just passed up. Muscular system, we are going to be studying the skeletal muscles in lab, and also we have a lecture unit on muscle physiology. This represents the nervous system, and of course we have a whole unit on the nervous system as well. The endocrine system, and the endocrine system is a very sophisticated system that includes all of your endocrine glands that secrete hormones, which by definition travel in the bloodstream and go everywhere in the body. They're very powerful, and they actually show here the female and male, because we all have the same endocrine glands, except with the reproductive system, where the female has ovaries and the males have testes. And each of these will produce and secrete different types of hormones. And of course we get to this in a later unit. Cardiovascular system, the blood vessels are going to transport the blood, and the heart pumps the blood. We have a whole unit on this as well. The lymphatic system and immunity. This is quite a complex system. You can see there's vessels here, but there's no real pump. The fluid inside, the lymph, will be moved around the body passively through the movement of your skeletal muscles. And of course, immunity and the immune system are quite complex. We get to this system during Bio 264 as well. And the respiratory system, that is going to supply the body with oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. And then the digestive system, where we will digest food, breaking it down And then absorption is actually when we absorb the nutrients into our bloodstream, and those nutrients can be taken around the body to all of our living cells. Urinary system, and this is the system that eliminates or excretes rather nitrogenous waste from the body and any kind of excess of water, electrolytes, etc. And male reproductive system and female reproductive system. I found this little Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because when we talk about the study of human anatomy and physiology, or the study of the human body, we have a certain need to survive. The body requires appropriate amounts of elements necessary for life, and that would be right at the base of this pyramid. And I don't know if any of you have actually studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but until we get our survival needs met, and you can see it really well, but it says water, food, sleep, etc. It would also include elimination of wastes, etc. You'll see these lists in a minute. But until we get these needs met, then we are not going to be able to go on to have a sense of physical safety or economic security. A next higher need for human beings is social needs, like the need for love and acceptance. Then our ego or esteem, where we have a sense of prestige or status. And finally, at the very top of this pyramid is our self-actualization. But remember, this is all built on being able to meet our survival needs. And actually, disease is when there is some kind of threat to your physical survival. Something is wrong there. So the survival needs would be being able to obtain nutrients. These are the chemicals for energy and cell building, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, nucleic acids, minerals, and vitamins. And we're going to be talking about this when we get to Chapter 2. We also need oxygen. Most of our body cells actually all of our body cells depend upon oxygen in order to break down glucose to get our cellular energy. And if you remember ATP, that's adenosine triphosphate. It's our energy currency for cellular processes. We also need to be able to excrete and eliminate any kind of waste or excesses from the body. We also need water. The environment, water is the environment or the solvent for all chemical reactions in the body. It's also the fluid base for our body secretions and excretions. We need to have a normal body temperature. Normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius or about 98.6, exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This affects the rates of chemical reactions because the temperature will affect enzyme activity. And if you'll remember, chemical reactions in living cells all require a specific enzyme. We also need to have appropriate atmospheric pressure. Homeostasis, this is one of the most important concepts with living systems. Homeostasis is the maintenance of stable internal conditions. It's actually quite dynamic, meaning it's in a state of equilibrium. And generally we have two parameters or boundaries between which a certain variable has to stay. The variables have to stay within these specific boundaries, and all organ systems contribute. With homeostatic control mechanisms, they will engage in a continuous monitoring and regulation of all these factors that can change. Any factor that can change is called a variable. So, in order to do this, we need communication systems in order to monitor and regulate the body. There are two major ways that the body will do this. Number one, through the nervous system via nerve impulses, and then also through the endocrine system via hormones. The components of a control mechanism would be sensory receptors or sensors, a control center which will be either in the central nervous system, typically the brain, or an endocrine gland, and then the effector. The effector causes an effect. And you can see with this illustration, it's a step art, so I'm going to go to the first one. Typically, we represent homeostasis with a little teeter-totter or a balance. And when it's in balance, this is when the body is healthy and everything is just in balance. When something changes, the body will respond in order to get that variable right back into balance. So this is when a stimulus produces a change in a variable. The receptor will detect the change. Input will go to the control center along what we call an afferent pathway to the control center. The output would be the information sent along an efferent pathway, and that goes to an effector. The effector will respond, so the response of the effector will feed back to produce the effect of the stimulus and then returns that variable to this homeostatic level into balance. Negative feedback systems are the way our body can maintain homeostasis. Most feedback mechanisms in the body are negative feedback systems, and this would be a response that reduces or shuts off the original stimulus. The effector activity will push that variable in the opposite direction. There are two examples, one with the nervous system and one with the endocrine system. The example for the nervous system would be regulation of body temperature. CNS, of course, means central nervous system. The other example would be regulation of blood glucose by insulin, and this is the endocrine system. So here we have a step art that shows you starting out where the body temperature rises. Let me see if there's no step art for this one. So the body temperature will rise when it's hot outside or you're generating body heat by working out, etc. Then there are receptors that are going to respond, temperature sensitive cells in your skin and the brain, and that's going to increase body temperature. That will go to the control center, which happens to be in our hypothalamus. It's a thermoregulatory center in your brain. The receptors, of course, communicate through afferent pathway, meaning sensory receptors. And then from the brain, from the central nervous system, the efferent pathway will go out to what we call effectors. This says sweat glands, but it's actually sweat glands, and I'm not able to change that. SWEAT. Anyway, sweat glands are activated, and so what are they going to do? They produce and secrete sweat or perspiration, and that's deposited on the outside of the body. And so through evaporation and convection, that's going to bring your body temperature down. Now, when the body temperature is brought into balance, the stimulus ends, and you should stop sweating. Now let's just say that the stimulus is cold. Body temperature falls. Receptors in the skin, they're temperature-sensitive cells in your skin and the brain, through an efferent pathway will be sent to that thermoregulatory center in your brain, and then through the efferent pathways will stimulate the body to, first of all, start shivering. Skeletal muscles typically are voluntary, but when your body temperature drops and you start shivering, that is involuntary. But what does it do? It generates heat. So now body temperature rises and the stimulus ends. So negative feedback is also illustrated by the regulation of blood glucose by insulin. So there are receptors that sense an increase in blood glucose. Blood glucose has to be kept within certain levels. The pancreas, which produces insulin, among other things, this now would be the control center. So when the body detects that blood glucose goes up, the pancreas will secrete the hormone insulin into the bloodstream. Insulin travels throughout the bloodstream, goes to body cells, which now we call the body cells, the effectors. They're going to now absorb more glucose, therefore decreasing blood glucose levels back to normal. Positive feedback is pretty rare in the human body, but there are a few examples. This response will enhance or exaggerate the original stimulus. It may exhibit what we call a cascade or amplifying effect. This positive feedback systems control infrequent events that don't require continuous adjustment. The example for your own personal survival would be platelet plug formation and blood clotting. Obviously, if the body gets, is injured and your blood vessel is severed, in order to survive, that blood vessel has to stop bleeding. You need to stop bleeding or you can bleed to death. And so during when platelet plug formation happens, initially there's platelets that are going to go to the site where the vessel is severed, and they'll send out signals for more and more platelets to join, and several other things that are going to happen in order to stop the bleeding. The other examples for positive feedback would be enhancement of labor contractions by oxytocin. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions. When labor starts, it's going to actually release oxytocin. This amplifies the labor contractions, and then eventually the baby will be born. The other example of positive feedback is sexual attraction for sexual reproduction. So initially, when two people are attracted to one another, the sexual attraction, it actually, if that's reinforced, it will increase that response to the other person until eventually they get together and have babies. Here's the example of blood clotting. First of all, you get a tear or a break in the blood vessel wall. The positive feedback is initiated. Then the platelets adhere to the site and they're going to release chemicals. The chemicals that are released attract more platelets. This feedback cycle will end once that plug is formed and the bleeding has stopped. That means the platelet plug is fully formed. There's quite a few other details, and we'll get to that when we study the blood. Homeostatic imbalance. When there's a disturbance in homeostasis, that's going to increase your risk for disease. There are the changes that are associated with aging end up where your control systems are less efficient. So disease happens more frequently among people as they get older. Okay, that's the end of part 1, and I'm going to stop right here, and then we will start up with part 2, and this happens to be slide number 55. No, I'm sorry. Slide 47 is where we're going to start out with part 2. See you later. Have a great day.